that infant decides to do. So it's her plan, but we'll see how it goes.
No excuses.
She was saying today that he does his own thing. 2 days in a row, he decided his own thing is not a nap.
Those are surprise occurrences.
Yes.
Really send parents scrambling.
They do. And especially as April knows, I mean, she knows I say that she's probably, Jen, would you say the most organized person you've ever met in your life? I mean, bar none, right?
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. So yeah,
Toddlers and babies, infants, Lauren, you know this well. They don't care about our organizational level. They have their own plan.
Listen, mine's not even quite out yet. She already has her own agenda and plan. They start early.
Let's see. I'll make Christine the co-host. Co-host. And Christine, you ought to be able to turn your video and audio on. I think Christine's audio is not quite connected. But we are a quorum. Annie, do you recall Tara and Paul's ability to attend this? You're on mute. There's Paul.
Okay, I have no picture.
Yes, Christine, we hear you, but we cannot see you. Sometimes that, oh, there we go.
There we go. Hello.
And
Too close.
let's make sure Paul is able to speak. Okay, let's get started. Annie, you're able to accept people from the waiting room, correct? Great, and there's Tara. Hi, Paul.
Hey, everybody.
Are you patching in from a new office?
No, it's just having some, this is my other workstation. I'm just having some computer problems. Anybody else having that? My interwebs have been intermittent all day today. I don't know if it's the weather.
I'm not sure. Mine has been fairly consistent. Hi, Tara, welcome.
Has it been?
Hi, everyone.
Okay, we are all here. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the July 25th Hadley Public Schools School Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to open the meeting?
Make a motion.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, let's get going. We have some adjustments to the agenda. Annie, do you want to take us through it?
Yes, all that we've done on the agenda is add, and it's highlighted in yellow, and the community can access these things. They're linked into the agenda. We have added the documents that Christine and Ethan will be referencing in terms of athletic policies and some suggested revisions. And there are also some suggestions from Amy Jennings, who has another commitment, but is going to try to make it here, and perhaps she will when we're talking about that.
Great.
That's it.
Thanks so much. Great. So we're going to open it up for public comment. If you have a comment on any items of the agenda, and there are quite a few, please go ahead and raise your digital hand and we will unmute you. We'd love to hear from the public on our many multiple items. So again, 3 minutes to comment. If you have any comments, please go ahead and raise your digital hand and we'd love to hear from you.
And Humira, we have someone joining now who may need to be told it's public comment if they can't hear yet.
Yes, I see Dana joining, and her audio is not yet connected. Just give it a few more minutes. It appears that Dana is having some difficulty. Annie, what's the policy on, yeah, I was going to say accepting people whose names are not clearly visible? Can we request that they rename themselves with their name?
That unfortunately, that option is not available. So what I would suggest out loud to the individual whose name is symbols only is I would suggest that they log off the meeting and then log on from a device that they have a different name for.
And so I'll just go ahead and reiterate that we are opening it up for public comment, and we invite you to raise your digital hand and share with us your thoughts on any items that are on the agenda. All right, Dana, thank you. We are going to unmute you. And great, I've asked you to unmute, and you ought to be able to unmute and speak now.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your time. My name is Dana Whitney. I have 2 students at Hopkins Academy. I'm mostly concerned about the idea of whole school discipline for the actions of some students. I'd like to know what cost-free measures due to the cell phone pouches, what cost-free disciplinary measures Hopkins has already exhausted, such as having students who are causing the problems turn in their cell phones to the principal at the beginning of the day, things like that, before we go to a costed measure that punishes the whole school. So that's my primary concern tonight. What has happened in the past, what measures, and then how are we going to enforce something that cost us quite a bit of money before we spend the money?
Great, thank you, Dana. And Annie, we will be addressing that a little later on. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great, thank you. Any other comments for open comment? Again, go ahead and raise your digital hand. If not, we will move right into the agenda. All right, Jessica, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, sorry, it's actually Alma, her daughter. I'm just on her laptop. I just bringing up the cell phone pouch topic of wanting to go over why the initial reaction to the clear issues with cell phones at the school is a like blanket statement for everyone rather than bringing up just the problems with individual students who don't seem to have been at all yet like spoken to really. It just seems like it's a bit of a like reaction that won't actually involve teaching students responsible cell phone use rather than just punishment, even for those that have not like participated in what's trying to be covered.
Thank you, Alma. You've raised some really important points, and we love when students join and share their thoughts. So encourage other students to join and share their ideas and thoughts with us. And thank you for speaking. And yeah, thank you. We'll address that when we get to that topic. Great. Any other public comment thoughts here? We do have a few visitors. I noticed some. Great. We're going to go ahead and ask you to unmute, person with the symbols. And if you could first identify who you are, I ought to be able to change your name to reflect that. Okay, you should be able to unmute now. All right, they may or may not be able to get their sound in operating condition. So I think we will have to continue without them. Okay, thank you very much. Last call for open comment. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much, everyone who's come to speak. We are going to move next into presentation and discussion items. Item A, review of changes to the pre-K handbook presented by Ms. Weiner. Welcome, Ms. Weiner.
Hi, thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I promise this will be quite short. I will do my best to share my screen with the summary. If not, I believe it is linked to the agenda, so people will be able to see that. All right, I think it's shared. The changes are very short and quick this year. Just some typical housekeeping things. We've changed the dates to reflect the new school year. We have also changed some of our wording regarding the remote learning payments. There will no longer be a remote learning option. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. And the rates for the school year have also been updated to reflect what was already accepted by the school committee earlier this year. So those are the changes that we are proposing. Everything else seems to be business as usual, getting back to our normal schedule and our normal activities. Everything else should be all set.
Great, thank you, Lauren. I'll open it up for any questions or comments from the school committee. I have none. They all seem pretty straightforward. Tara, Paul, Christine, and Ethan. Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve the requested changes?
So moved.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Weiner.
Thank you so much.
See you again. Okay, moving on to item B, cell phone pouches. We'll begin first with a presentation or brief remarks from Chief Mason. Welcome, Chief Mason. You've been made co-host. You ought to be able to unmute and turn your video on to address the group.
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, for some reason, I can't find a way to turn my video on. Let's see.
Do you see the video icon in the lower left-hand corner, Mike, or is it not there for some reason?
There we go.
You are.
I don't know why it's blurry behind me. I was pushing all kinds of buttons to get it to work, and I'm not going to touch it again.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I was asked to just kind of be present tonight in case there was any questions as it relates specifically to public safety with the cell phone pouches. I don't, really have a preference or a concern, or I don't have really kind of a stance as to, putting them in the schools as far as what the issues are and all that. Annie just kind of asked me to think about it because there may be questions of how it relates with us specifically. And so I spent the last couple of weeks really kind of thinking about it and doing a little bit of research on some places that already have them and places that are contemplating using them. And I guess I just kind of wanted to give you just a couple of my thoughts on how it relates to Hadley Public Safety if you do use these cell phone pouches. Several months back, I don't know if you all recall the double shooting that we had at in the Walmart bathroom. Let me turn this down. Sorry about that. We had a shooting in the Walmart bathroom several months ago, and the reason I bring it up is because with the way that our dispatch center is set up, we have one, sometimes two dispatchers working at a time. The dispatcher who was working that evening became completely inundated with calls from people inside of Walmart within probably a few minutes, less than 2 minutes, I would say. She had to go back and really kind of look at the people who had called. She took incredible notes. She dispatched the officers. The officers apprehended the shooting suspects and actually performed life-saving measures on the individuals who had been shot while she was still trying to call people back who were inside of Walmart. And so the reason I bring it up is because, God forbid, in a situation where, one of the concerns that was brought to me is how will students call if there's an emergency? And the reason I bring that up is because of that. Obviously, we want to get as much information as we can if there is a problem, but that's also the reason that every classroom has a phone, a regular phone in the classroom. That's also why we give the principals or the staff at the front of the building the radio that can call directly to dispatch. And it's also why we have a cell phone radio app that I believe Annie and a few other of the administrators of the school have on their cell phones, and it actually turns their cell phone into a radio that they can contact our dispatch directly with as well. That's kind of the reason that we do all of those things. And so having 50, 75, 100 people calling 911 all at the same time poses a problem for us. So like I said, we would deal with it one way or the other if you decide to go down this road or if you don't. But that was one thing that really kind of popped in my head that I think is kind of crucial for you all to know before you make your decision. The other thing that I'll kind of tell you, and you can take this or leave it, I am the police chief in town, but I'm also a father. I have two kids in the school systems, not in Hadley school systems, but I live in Whately, so I have my son goes to Whately Elementary and my daughter goes to Frontier. My son is not yet of age to have a cell phone, so I'm not super worried about that one yet, but my daughter has one and she is glued to it, as I'm sure, many of the kids are. I mean, I'm glued to mine, for crying out loud. I can only tell you what I have told them and what I have told them from a very young age, and it makes me kind of nauseous to even have to have this conversation with them, especially when I've talked to both of them while they were in the elementary school. The elementary school, all the classrooms have back doors that exit to the outside. And we're lucky enough in Whately to actually have a police officer who lives next door or one house down from where the school is. And I have had to sit down. I sat down with both of my children and I told them that, you're not going to be worried about being on a cell phone, calling someone, texting someone or something like that. And I've told my daughter this while she's at Frontier. you get out. You put your head down and you run towards the nearest exit that you feel is safe, and you get out of that classroom. If there's a window, you jump out the window. If there's a door, you go out the door. It's a personal conversation that I've had with my kids. And like I said, take it or leave it. That is just my own personal opinion of how I've handled it with my children. It's a sobering conversation to have, but at the same time, it's that whole, don't stop to think about it. You run, you hide, or you fight, if those are the things that you have to do. And I apologize if I'm going down a road that nobody wants to go down to talk about, the tragedies that can happen in a school. The only other thing that I found in my research, and I don't know if, and I apologize, if you've researched this to the point where you've selected a product, but in the event of an emergency, I've seen some of these pouches which have an emergency brake, emergency release that makes them, you're able to get the case open and use the phone if you wish in an emergency. And it is made in such a way that, if a student did it for a non-emergency, obviously the case is now ruined. So you would know, what happened. You would know that someone took their phone out of the case. There are products like that out there. I'm sure you probably already know that. And I apologize if you've already selected something that's not that kind, but I did want to kind of toss that out there as well. So that's all I wanted to say. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but from a professional approach and from a personal approach, I just wanted to kind of throw those ideas at you, and for you to kind of ruminate on before you decide.
Thank you, Chief Mason. We're looking at other options. I think Annie even has brought to the committee an alternative option. So thank you for suggesting that, and we'll keep our eyes open for other options. I think that's part of the discussion the committee will have about looking at alternatives and what has been done. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of Chief Mason? Any of the committee members?
I have kind of a half question because I think I know the answer, but Chief Mason, it's my understanding that not only do all the classrooms have a telephone in them that can call outside, does it also alert the dispatch the location of that phone number on the phone when they call? So if someone calls from classroom, I don't know the classrooms in Hopkins, but 32 in Hopkins, that is alerted to the dispatch so they know exactly where the call was made from?
So I do think that it'll actually show up with the address and the room number. But as far as the landline goes, that's something that I think Sergeant Romano did do a test on a while back when they did their safety protocols. And so that does work to my knowledge. Each classroom does show up with to the dispatch center. If they were to call, they have to call 911. It doesn't work with just a regular business line. It won't tell us like on a regular caller ID, but it does tell us on 911.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing Annie nod her head. I believe this was something that came up in the policy subcommittee meeting, and it was confirmed that the location can be pinpointed to the exact classroom.
To the chief's point, though, 911 will do that pinpoint. Just any regular call out would not do that, even to the police department. It has to be a 911 call.
Right. Great, thank you. Any other questions for Chief Mason? Great. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
And thank you for continuing to stay on for this part of the conversation.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Great. So moving next to the policy subcommittee to discuss feedback from the July 18th meeting. I wonder first, Ethan and Christine, if you would like to recap for us that discussion.
Ethan, would you like to go
Sure.
first?
Yeah. Yes. I'm. It's all good. I'll go through I have my list of things that we talked about. Obviously, we're going to have a conversation around all of this. But as far as I kind of landed on the topics we hit, obviously there was no public comment. And so we didn't hear from anybody in the public about the cell phone policy. But we kind of went over the current policy. Things we went over was current policy. We talked a little bit about how it would be paid for, the reasoning behind it, how we would implement this policy. We talked a little bit about the opportunity to do text messaging notifications from the school through School Brains, which if you look at the survey data would eliminate, in my opinion, a lot of the concerns that parents have. And so I feel like that could be a really strong possibility for that. Christine, did I miss anything? Probably.
We did talk about this not being a punishment in any way. It's actually more of a best practice in terms of education. We discussed the fact that we're not doing this because of any certain amount of students who, we actually I don't even know if we received that kind of data in terms of what disciplinary actions have been taken or numbers. It really doesn't have to do with that. We just wanted to reiterate that we've never thought of this as a punishment, but as a way to help our students get more from their classroom experience. So Annie, if you want to speak to that, you can also.
Certainly, and I will say, no, we didn't have that data. I can tell you that, and it may be included in the staff feedback potentially, but I will tell you that violations of the cell phone policy constitute about 10% of disciplinary infractions in the 21-22 school year. And that, and perhaps then I'll speak to what one public comment asked a question about, have non-cost options been explored? So I would say the policies that currently, the policy and language in the handbook as it currently exists is implemented. Students who do violate the policy, we have documentation of the steps that are taken in accordance with the handbook. So that includes phone calls home, teacher detention, office detention, losing the ability to have a cell phone, needing to turn the cell phone in if they bring it to school. So these progressive discipline measures have been implemented. In the case, depending on where a student falls, when I told you that it was about 10% of the disciplinary actions last year, I would say that those constitute no cost measures. And the one that we lean into the most is really trying to engage with parents when students seem unwilling, or honestly, in fairness to them, let's hear now, in fairness to the students, that unwilling, or it may not be an act of deliberate insubordination, but rather more for some, they almost may feel as though they are incapable of untethering themselves from their cell phone, from incapable of ignoring notifications, texts that they receive during the day, particularly if the text comes from somebody who's important to them. So the no cost options that we have implemented have been to implement the handbook. Our student who's here this evening very eloquently and astutely asked the question of, and I'm paraphrasing, raise the issue of, does this seem a bit heavy-handed, as though we're enacting what feels like a pretty extreme policy response to what might be a few people who are really struggling. And so if I were that student, even when I just said, well, it's 10%, if I were that student, I'd say, so maybe what you're telling me is 90% of the students are not. 90% of the infractions, I should say that differently. It's not percent of students. 90% of the infractions had nothing to do with cell phones. Is this really the biggest issue that we have? And I'll underscore, as others have heard me say this before, I'll underscore what Chris just said, that for me, for Ms. Camuso, and for the staff. So in the agenda, you see a link to staff survey data. that the motivation is not to punish students. The concern is that what the staff and faculty are observing is that cell phones, notifications, that students are being driven to a level of distractibility that it is increasingly challenging for them to manage. And we're asking ourselves, do we have a responsibility as the adults and professionals to create conditions that are more conducive to paying attention and to learning? And so when we asked that question, we started to explore options. I can't appreciate, I do want to say this, I can't appreciate the student's point, particularly, I know that student. And so I have no doubt that that student is very conscientious of rules and expectations and adhering to those expectations. So I can appreciate where one might feel like, this feels like, and the first, Dana had mentioned that her concerns about kind of this whole school approach, whole school discipline. When does that make sense? Does that ever make sense? So again, I go back to what Christine had said, really the motivation is, and that doesn't mean that this is how people experience it. The motivation isn't around punishment, but rather around attempting to create conditions that are far more conducive to paying attention and to learning. Having said that, you'll also see in the agenda that, so you have feedback in the agenda linked from the faculty and staff. You have feedback from a survey. There were about 62 respondents to the survey. And there was various opinions on the survey. The survey was sent to over 600 unique emails, sometimes parent 1 and parent 2 emails. We got 62 responses. And I appreciate those people who took the time to respond. You also have included in there, if Ms. Camuso started to get to work on if we were to go down the path of having cell phone pouches, here are some additional considerations. What might the language in the handbook look like? And finally, there's also the option that the school committee could entertain of, is there a middle road? So I included, it isn't an ad for Walmart, I just included a link so you could see there are pouches whereby students could deposit their phones at the beginning of class. Now, again, our goal is to help students to adhere to the existing expectation. Means if that phone is deposited in a pouch, the student doesn't get up in the middle of class and say, oh, my watch just told me that somebody just texted me, that it stays in that pouch for the class period. In middle school, it's turned in at the beginning of the day because middle school students, per our current policy, don't have access, should not be using their cell phones at lunch, in the hallways. And the high school students would deposit it when they entered a class. At the end of the period, they would take their cell phone, they would go to their next class. High school students have a little bit of different privileges when it comes to when they can use their cell phones. So we also know that the school committee is working very hard to make a thoughtful recommendation that takes into consideration the questions and concerns that have been posed by a wide range of stakeholders, and also to acknowledge that the faculty and staff have overwhelmingly said there is an issue here and we need support in addressing it. I do want to clarify for the public, the school committee, one, is weighing in on this for two reasons, not because they typically manage day-to-day procedures in the school, but if we alter something, it requires language in the handbook. That's part of policy. The school committee approves handbooks. And if we were to decide to purchase something, it would be out of school choice, and the school committee needs to approve any school choice funding. We could do school choice or grant. So that was my take on our policy subcommittee meeting and some of the items that are in the agenda. And I know that Ms. Camuso is also here if the committee had any questions for her.
April, do you have anything you'd like to add to Annie's remarks on this before the committee deliberates on it?
Sure. For the most part, I would just echo what Annie says. And I know that it feels like a disciplinary reaction and that it's a conduct issue. And I think that, again, is not our motivation, nor is it the staff's motivation. Certainly, if we just wanted to enhance this in a more disciplinary way, we could. that's, fairly easy to do. And we've done that before. I think it's more that, as Annie said, we do want to create conditions where students can learn. So there's lots of things that students don't have access to at school because they would distract them from learning. And cell phones have become so advanced, and, they're related AirPods and smartwatches and things of that nature that, for us, it's helping students to have time where those things are not a distraction and they can just focus on learning. Again, we have the sort of more middle option if, that's something that people think is a better first step, whatever we can do to increase the amount of time where students can focus and be off of social media, be off of, texting one another. I mean, we have many students, things that would never show up in school brains data around discipline. You have students who become dysregulated because they get a text from a friend or a family member, and then that throws off their entire day. You have students who get texts from their parents that they're bringing them breakfast, and then they leave class to go get breakfast. That happens pretty frequently too. And you'll see some language about food drop off in our next handbook. So there's all sorts of things that I think people don't think about as how this is going to impact what's happening in the classroom at that time, because it's just this quick thing, right? It's a quick text, but it does end up stopping someone's focus in that moment and shifting that focus. And I think that's the big thing. And the number of times that you are stopped from thinking deeply, which is what we want our students to do, and collaborating with one another, it just adds up. I know our own students have done their own research and different projects on just, what the research shows about how distracted you are, even just knowing that you have it on your person. So again, I think keeping it off in a way, in some way too, is still better than what we currently have. And certainly, that what you see, just like you're not going to see every time a student uses an inappropriate word written up either, it would just become kind of crazy at that point. So it doesn't accurately reflect even students, I think, who believe, that they're being good. And again, it's not about being good or bad. I think if people, took some time to self-reflect, how much am I really on this device and how much am I really accessing the device, I think they would be surprised.
I think another thing that people don't realize is you're saying that, one student you have to remind, okay, can you please put your phone away? Oh, can you please put your phone away? Can you not look at that? There's a lot of time that teachers spend in dealing with this that, like you said, one-on-one is not, each individual thing is very short, but it adds up, and that takes away from everyone's classroom experience. It distracts everyone. It's not just about, well, it was just one ding or one text message came in. Well, that's what, now the teacher had to stop and discipline, and it's interrupting the class. So I think it just adds up and distracts, because the next thing you know, it's going to be, who texted you? What did they say? And again, then the conversation is, okay, guys, can we not talk about the text? And again, now my class time is taken. So I think teachers are spending more time than people realize on this issue, just in reminding them. It's not that they're being disciplined, but just the reminding is taking up time. So, to me, I don't see this as a punishment as much as just a break. There's not, if students really thought about what it does to their school day and how necessary it is to have during the school day, I don't think that many of them could come up with a compelling argument as to why they should be on. But
I could add one more of my thoughts, which I can't remember if I said at the previous meeting or not, but I was always an advocate for teaching kids to just control their usage before the last time we went into our sort of zero tolerance policy. And since then, it's just, especially post-COVID, it's just, they're so addicted. And the more that technology has become a part of their day-to-day life, teenagers don't have fully developed brains. So they're just really, really addicted to the technology. So I have shifted my own view about helping them to, as Chris said, take a break from that in whatever way for as long as we, think is reasonable. Anything that kind of helps them to do that. And I know because they were essentially born with this technology, it feels like they're being punished and something's being taken away from them. But, the staff really just want to help them focus on their learning and their engagement with the people around them. And, they can take time on their phones later on, and they can just sort of enjoy the presence of actual people so that, we're not just watching them stare at their phone and not communicate with one another. So I and many of the staff members have changed our perspective around that. The more research that there's been, the more that we've read, and the more that we've observed in practice, that it really is just problematic. So I just wanted to add that also.
Great. Thank you, April. Appreciate it. And also thank you, Christine, for kicking off the committee deliberation. I'm going to, at this time, ask Ethan, Tara, and Paul to share their thoughts on this.
Can I ask a question? I'm just curious, what is the existing policy? Can a student have their phone on and on their person? And what's the use limitation during class, between classes, at lunch?
So for middle school, it's supposed to be off and off of their person from the very start of the day to the very end of the day. Many students sort of, and this is sort of that disciplinary end, but many, for a variety of reasons, refuse to have it off of their person. But a lot of it, I believe, has to do with that addiction of just like, it has to be in my hand at all times, even if I'm not using it. So it has to be somewhere they can get easily. High school is a little bit different. So high school is allowed to have it during passing times, breakfast and lunch. And then it's similarly supposed to be like off and off of their person during class, but they are allowed to use it with permission currently. So if, for example, a teacher was doing like a Kahoot game, which you can do on your Chromebook, but you can also have an app for that, right? A student could take out their phone for a Kahoot game with the teacher's permission, or to listen to their music or things of that nature. Text their parent if they said, hey, this was canceled, can I text my parent? They're supposed to ask, and then they do that, and then they're supposed to put it back away again.
Thanks, April. So the Yonder technology, the pouches, the phones would be secured in the morning, released in the afternoon. So that's further than the current policy. There is that sort of other proposal where they're sort of in some fashion give up their phone as they enter into a classroom, and maybe, as Annie suggested, some sort of pouch. That would basically just be a procedural way to implement and enforce the current policy. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, and the one sort of difference that I think is important to note with that idea of giving them a break is that in the current policy, right, they can ask, hey, can I use my phone for this? Can I use my phone for that? In the suggestion of this sort of middle ground, you wouldn't do that. So you would still just have to take that break for that 80 minutes. You couldn't say, hey, can I text my mom? It's like, no, you can do that during passing time if that's what you need to do during passing time. And you can, play Kahoot on your Chromebook, and you can listen to music on your Chromebook. So it's still keeping that device separate. So there's that slight difference, if that makes sense.
I have some feedback, but also just to clarify, every student at Hopkins Academy, middle school and high school, is equipped with a Chromebook throughout the day in every class.
They can be. If they choose to use their own device, they can use their own device, but otherwise we are one-to-one. So every student has one that they also take home. The incoming 7th graders, for example, will all be assigned one, or any new students. And if something happens to their Chromebook and it has to be repaired, they have one that they loan out during that period of time.
Okay. And just the reason I ask this before I kind of give my thoughts on what others have said is just because I did see that there was one parent comment about the utilization of surveys in classrooms and whatnot, and technology and blah, blah, blah. So they would have the ability to still participate in those types of things with the Chromebook. They do not need a cell phone to do that.
Correct.
So just it would be something that could just, make sure they have it on hand if they don't choose to use it all the time. If they know that they're going to be in a classroom, teacher can say, make sure you come prepared with your Chromebook on such and such day. We're going to do blah, blah, blah. So that's good to know. I had a lot of thoughts as Chief Mason and Christine were talking, and I agree with what Christine is saying, that there's a lot of distractibility, and it's not just students, it's about teachers as well. And both as a school committee member and as a parent, I don't like the idea of a teacher who's hired and paid for by the town of Hadley, taking time out of their lesson that they've probably spent a long time planning and preparing for, to remind students even 10% of the time. You're in class, that's your time to focus. And you would expect that your surgeon that's taking, a surgical procedure on you wouldn't stop to text a friend in the middle of a surgery. This classroom is kind of the same thing. You're learning right now. It's not time for texting. It's time for learning. And, as Chief Mason said, there's phones in every classroom. And I do hear that it's overwhelming and it's scary and gives me chills to think about what goes on in this country with gun violence and what goes on and what has happened in schools. And that it's not impossible for it to happen in even a small town like ours. Even if the probability is low, it's not impossible. So as a parent, I think, yeah, that is concerning to think about. But like Chief Mason said, there's a phone in every classroom. And I don't like the thought of the dispatcher being inundated with phone calls when the call that they should get would be from the classroom, from administration, not 60 calls that they're so inundated with calls. They need to get the call that is the most important and critical. And like he also said, a student's responsibility at that time, we do drills, right? This past year, we all showed up at the drop-off line, and we had local police and state police there to go through these drills about what you do in a lockdown. I want my student and everybody's students, for their safety, to not be fidgeting, finding a cell phone, texting somebody, calling somebody. That's taking away from their ability in the event of an emergency to keep themselves safe. And so finding a way out and keeping yourself safe, and the thought of not being able to talk to your child and knowing there's something going on is terrifying. And I can't even imagine what that feels like. And I don't ever want to imagine, or have any of us have to imagine that. But I think about that situation, and I would hope that my child's not worried about where their cell phone is, where their backpack is, where their computer is, where any of those replaceable things are, that they just run, they get out, they get themselves to safety. And by golly, I'll be terrified for however long, but I'm going to be so thankful that they did everything they could to get out of harm's way, and that hopefully they're safe. So, I think from a safety perspective, I don't see the need for a phone in the classroom. I think from a teacher and learning perspective, I don't see the need to have that phone on them, especially when the school is one-on-one with technology. They have access to technology. There's no lack of access to technology. And my children are too young for phones, even though my 9-year-old is begging for one. He won't be having one for a long time. I don't even know if I'd let him go to school with a phone, or if I did have a child in the high school, I would be supportive of him not having the phone. I don't feel like each individual teacher should be at the mercy of handling a situation like that. I like to be honest, I like the idea of, because I know this is kind of a challenging thought and we're all used to our phones. Everybody always has their phones on them. Like we've all said, it's, you lose your phone and you're frantic, you got to find my phone, and like the world stops no matter what's going on. Like, where did I put my phone? Oh my God. But I like the idea of this kind of middle ground where, like April said, the high schoolers have access to their phones on breaks and at lunches in between classes. I like the idea of kind of like starting a stepwise approach, right? So this isn't like the end all be all, but maybe what we say is, okay, we're not taking away your phone for the day. We realize that you can have that ability to use your phone at lunches and breaks, whatever, whatnot. So it goes in the pouch during the day, whether it be off or completely silenced. I don't know how that would work, but I like the idea of them being placed in the pouch in the classroom at the beginning of class, again, with the policy that it's silenced. And then if there has to be some reprimand for phone that keeps dinging, 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 then you further it on there saying, okay, guys, this is the policy. And you have some sort of like, repercussions in place for being unable to follow the policy, and kind of try it out and see how it goes. And if it solves the problem and kids are doing well, they're listening, they feel respected because they still get to have their phones in that classroom, but they're just kind of tucked away. They get to use them on their breaks or whatnot, then great, no problem. If they start showing up late for class because they're in the hallways on their phones, if, phones are constantly dinging and it's something that needs to come back to the school committee, then maybe we look at the next step. Okay, well, the pouches in the classrooms weren't working. So now where do we take it? So I think that the concept behind what Annie and April and Christine have been saying about distractibility and helping teach our kids that this is the time we need to focus. We can live without our phones for this short amount of time and it will be okay, is really important. But also giving them the respect to know that this is how they've grown. They're like born knowing technology, and that is just a foreign concept to not have a phone. And I know it wasn't like that for us, but this is kind of, I like the idea of the middle ground to start to see if it works. Say, okay, we hear you, we respect you, let's start here and see if we can make it work. And 6 months from now or however long, get some feedback about how it's working and then reconvene as needed. That's kind of my thoughts.
That applies to the high school. And that doesn't apply to the middle school. The middle school is not allowed to use them during lunch or during the break or during the passing between classes.
Right. So their phone would be placed in a pouch for the day, right? In their homerooms or?
The problem with that is that makes the teacher or the person responsible for the safety of that technology. So if somebody has their phone stolen, whoever's room it was in is now responsible for it. So I think that was, that the pouch thing can work, but that means that the teacher can't leave things if anybody could, got into the room or somebody messed with somebody else's phone, that teacher is now responsible for someone else's property. I think that's, part of the problem with the pouch.
So maybe there's an alternative to, sorry, just to say, as I was looking through Annie's link, not the ad for Walmart, but just looking at possible alternatives. Maybe there is, I saw, although unappealing, like little cages that you can put phones in. So maybe there's something that's less expensive, that's an alternative that also keeps things safe if middle schoolers are allowed to bring their phones to school still. I don't know, just thoughts.
Thank you, Tara. You bring up a really good point, which is that there's probably something in between, right? There's the very extreme option of these magnetic pouches. There's the entirely looser option of putting it in but then there's probably a whole bunch of things in between that we haven't yet explored. So thank you for that. Ethan and Paul.
I was just going to respond to that. I've got some other thoughts, but on that kind of finding the middle ground, I think if you'd asked me like 2 weeks ago, I probably would have said that's where we need to be. But I worry that people are already calling this a response to discipline. And I don't believe this is. I'm thinking of this completely at this point in terms of teaching and learning, and the idea that it's not the teacher's responsibility to teach kids how to use their cell phone, nor it is their responsibility to have to kind of continually tell them to put it away if it is coming out. But that's the other part of the conversation. I worry that if we did a tiered approach like this and said, let's try this, the pouches, which I do like, the pouches on the wall, my old school had it, kids put their cell phones in there, at the end of class, they take it away. And it didn't work. And 6 months later, we revisited this and said, let's go to the Yonder pouches, then it is definitely kind of a response to discipline. And we're going to be hearing the same comments and having the same conversation. So that's just my comment on that idea. The safety part I get. I just keep thinking about, I can't think of a good reason why a student needs their cell phone during the school day. And I know we can reference the survey data, and I talked a little bit about it earlier. A lot of the comments from parents, and they were really good comments, and I appreciated the 60 people that responded, but a lot of it's like, I need them to be responsive before and after school, or I need to text them if something changes. And the reality is that if we do a good job, obviously getting them their phones before and after school, but also doing a better job of communicating with families through text messaging and email and phone if possible, that a lot of those reasons for the kids having their phones won't necessarily be there anymore. And what we kind of want to avoid is those distractions. That's what we're really at the heart of this, is like keeping kids from getting distracted. Now, of course, they're going to find something else to get distracted by, but if we can do this in a way that doesn't feel like discipline, even though I know some kids will feel it that way, to me, it's more about teaching and learning. It's more about keeping them focused. And I don't necessarily, I haven't heard a reason why they need their phones during the school day.
Thank you, Ethan. Paul, you had a question before, but I don't think we've heard your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, I text my son during school days, which is probably part of the problem, right? But it's very helpful if his practice changes, if his mom can't pick him up. Those are the kinds of things. Do I assume he's looking at it at lunch? Yeah, that is what I guess it's a question for April. There is quite a discrepancy between the parent survey and the teacher survey. The parents, basically, the majority of the 62 respondents are comfortable with their kids having their phones at school, do not think it's a problem. And a lot of the responses are about those logistical challenges and how the phone facilitates those. But then the teachers are quite opposite, right? 92% said they are encouraging some sort of limitation. Let me ask this. Are the teachers more concerned about the cell phone use during class, outside of class, to take the high school students, the before, after, the passing time, the lunch time? Which is most concerning to them? And are they concerned about both periods of phone use?
I guess that's that's tough, because I would say they're concerned about all of it. But I guess for a classroom teacher, I think that, the first primary concern is often going to be classroom, but what happens during classroom isn't always within the actual classroom. So for example, if a student goes to the restroom, they're not technically supposed to take their phone with them, but of course, we don't take their phone physically off of their person. Right. So they will typically take their phone with them and go make their texts and their calls in the hall on the way to the bathroom, or in the bathroom, or maybe even meet up with a friend in the hallway. So it's still during the class time. But there's going to be, obviously, when you're in the physical classroom, you're going to get that range of some kids, you don't really see their phone very much, and others, they just have it, but they don't touch it, but they need to be near it and know that they have access to it. And then there are the kids that are just blatantly on it, and they end up, being written up because that doesn't stop, or they're, have a meeting with their parents. So I would say that time, but it's going to be a variety of things that you're going to experience. And then, of course, I think, it doesn't impact them as directly immediately, but many of the staff members have referenced concerns about kids not socializing. And so that is during things like lunch, where they can see that they're not really socializing with one another. They're just sort of on their phones, playing games or looking at social media or, doing all of those things instead of just interacting. So I do think both, are concerning to them. You're just going to hit a variety of things, because if a kid's leaving the classroom, to go text for 10 minutes in the bathroom, then that's, impacting class differently. So it can look a variety.
So just to be clear though, so that is against the rules. They should
Correct.
not take their phone during it. Them texting at lunch as a high school student, is that against the rules?
It is within the rules at lunch, yes.
Within the rules. So I guess the question I'm asking is one of, are we saying the current rules, if fully implemented, are sufficient? And I heard you say kind of not, that some teachers might say they're concerned about texting at lunch, which is currently allowed for high school students. Or do we need to go beyond and modify the current rules? Take implementation aside. So if we were just to say that the current rules are sufficient if they were implemented 100% effectively, then we're solving one problem. Are we solving another problem, that the current rules are insufficient, even if sufficiently implemented?
I think yes, because again, I think staff are concerned about those other times, even though they're allowed to do those things. I think staff are concerned that they're choosing to just be on their phones rather than that. In terms of the implementation, I think one of the problems, which you guys can certainly think about that's tough, is if, which is maybe sort of the middle ground policy really, is how you ensure that a student comes in, shuts off their phone and puts their phone away. So unless, again, you're watching them do that in some way, like putting it in a pouch or saying at the beginning of every class, like, this is where we're going to put it and put it in their bag. But of course, then they can take it out of their bag when you're not looking. That's the part where the implementation piece gets really tricky if the student has access to their phone. Does that make sense?
Yeah. May I add something that I think gets at one of the questions you asked? As you folks know, my observations and personal opinion, and I'm not observing this to the same extent that faculty and staff are every day, but even if fully implemented, again, I initially presented this to the school committee from the framework of that book, Stolen Focus, and some of the other corresponding research and work around it, which, to be clear, the research says we need to do more research. So, however, for me, it's not hard to imagine. It isn't just, is the actual class getting disrupted? Like a student takes out a phone and texts. Maybe not. Maybe they get through. Maybe they're checking surreptitiously. I believe that the school committee has received emails kind of describing this type of thing that might happen in a classroom. Maybe the students are using it within the existing rules. So Paul, you said if we just, and I would say the staff are pretty consistent in enforcement.
Yeah,
but
and it's not about staff. Just in an ideal world, taking people out. If they did not have access, so I'm trying not to make it about implementation effectiveness about the teachers. It's just sort of, can we structure a system where they don't have access during the classroom, or do we also need to structure a system where they don't have access all day?
So I would say what Stolen Focus gets to, but you're hearing other folks say in public comment, well, we don't define the problem that way. But as I've said, for me, and it's easy to imagine, students can easily not only be distracted, but as April said, can be dysregulated. And if people think that's hard to imagine, I want you to think about, adults have completely severed family relationships and friendships over social media. Functioning adults frequently can't handle the things that they read or see, or these things absolutely erode relationships. So it's not a stretch to think this can also happen to adolescents when they read things, see things, are told about things that may or may not pertain to them. So I would say, which is why we started with that initial, gosh, doesn't mean I can't control what happens outside of school, but at least for 6.5 hours, could they get a break from that? A middle ground could be, well, I can check every 80 minutes. Perhaps then your brain gets a break for 80 minutes. I think that's how I would answer your question, although there isn't a consensus as to what the goal should be and what the problem is. But that is where I stand on it.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just trying to, so there's, given that conflict between what the parents have said in that survey, and albeit it's 10% of the people you asked responded, but of those 10%, 50 to 60 are saying, I don't see a problem with my kid having a phone at school or in class, right? And so I want a clear and compelling reason that there's a benefit not to listen to the parents, and part of that is that compelling reason from the teachers. 92% of the respondents are saying, yeah, there's a problem and we want this restricted. But is it just restricted because this area of, well, that you just restrict during class, that gets at maybe the teachers are somewhat happy, the parents are somewhat happy because now they can access their kid at lunch and tell them that they forgot their shoes for practice? Or are we limiting all during those 6.5 hours of pedagogy during the day, including lunch? And that probably frustrates more the parents a little bit. And so what's that clear and compelling reason to do that, to not follow what the parents said in their survey? Here, go ahead, Ethan.
Paul, I just want to ask a question about what you just said, because you said that text about, you forgot your shoes at home. What is if that text comes through to a student, what are they going to do about that until the end of the day? I guess that would be my response.
I mean,
if that text comes through at lunchtime or it comes,
or they borrow
it's
from
usually
their
the case
friends.
that the student is saying to the parent, hey, I forgot this. Do you mind bringing it in?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's
If it's my
a
kids,
scenario
that's
that I
pretty much
hadn't
what it
thought
is.
of, Paul. There's,
Yeah.
there are young brains, and there's, whether it's the cleats, it could be the homework, it could be the text, it could be all kinds of things. And so, yeah, I have gotten that kind of text, and I've appreciated being able to quickly help. But I hadn't considered that, so thank you for bringing that up.
Well, like you said, Humira, you couldn't go down to the office, right?
Exactly.
This is how we did it growing up, we know. But it's a different world, and I'm not going to say my 1970s upbringing is how 2020 upbringing has to be, because it's probably different.
No, I agree with you, Paul. I think that kind of in that statement and in that conversation, there's this idea of like, well, the only way that they could possibly communicate with their parents is through the cell phone, and we know that that's not the case, right? And again, like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, but again, I just keep coming back to the idea that I don't see a reason why the students need the cell phone during the day, and if the teachers feel like it's having an impact on the school day that much, to your point, I feel like that matters a lot. And again, if 92% of the teachers feel this way now, are we going to see it keep moving in that direction? And again, that's all projecting, and I know maybe that's not the best thing to do, but I just keep thinking about, can I hear a compelling reason why they need their cell phone during the day?
Yeah, I mean, you might not find one, but I think in that survey you have parents who had strongly held beliefs that they want it. So whether I agree with it or not, others seem to state it. And let's be honest, I mean, I think there was, having Chief Mason come on and talk about security, that was a point I'd never thought about inundating 911. I think the reality in which you saw this with some of the comments is, if my son's about to be shot, I want to be able to talk to him before he dies. That's the harsh reality that you heard from Uvalde, that I think you get that sense from some of the comments, and that's horrible. But I think that is a tone that's underlying that. I want to be able to access my child at all times, because I don't know what this world's going to bring to my child. So it's not just about whether that child and all 20 of them call 911. It's, can I talk to them right now? So for me, it is about parsing out, dissecting what the real problem is. If it's an overarching problem that they shouldn't have access all day, that's a different answer. If we're trying to find a common ground maybe, and respect some of what the parents said, but still respect what the teachers are saying, that I totally understand. And I think we heard some direct testimony, written testimony from some teachers that was really compelling about how things have changed over the last 17 years of them teaching. I believe that. So can we find a way to restrict use in those periods where they should be just in class? And middle schoolers could just as easily put their phones in one of those pouches and leave it there, just as a high school student can.
Well, just to sort of address what you just said about being able to get to your kid. The pouches, if there's an emergency, the kids can rip them open. They can they can destroy them. That is completely understandable. And they're actually going to be closer to them than the pouch than having it on a wall, because it'll be in their backpack. So they can get into them by breaking the pouch if it's anything like like you said, a Uvalde situation. So they're not going to be without their phones. I mean, obviously, for if you forgot your sneakers, that's not a good reason to damage the pouch. But they can get to their phones in an emergency. It's just not for, not for texting your parents when you've forgotten something, or, that, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's helpful, Christina. My bigger point is one of what the survey said from the parents, and how do we be respectful for them and be respectful of the teachers.
I haven't had a chance to weigh in, so if I might just add some additional perspective. As you all know, I'm a big proponent of technology. It's one of the things that I've really advocated for in all my years as school committee member, and I really came full circle on this issue, having seen the way social media and access to my phone just affects me during the day. When I hear something happening on the news or whatever, I know that it increases my stress levels, and I've been trying even to set my phone aside a lot more and not take it with me in a lot of different places. And I've noticed a substantial difference, and I imagine that difference would be even more substantial for young people. So I really went into this with an open mind, thinking maybe these pouches could be the answer. And as you also all know, I'm big into trying prototypes of things. So what might we be able to do that helps us learn whether we're going down the right path? And taking a prototyping mindset, you just really want to try something out, try a new norm, try it inexpensively, and learn from it, and then maybe invest in a more permanent solution. And for that reason, I'm seeing the alternative of the pouch solution, and realizing, well, we've had a policy that we haven't changed, and we haven't really adjusted any norms or practices or procedures that institute those policies in different ways. It feels as though the pouch on the wall solution might allow us to test some of those new norms. And I'm, I heard what you said, Ethan, about like, if that doesn't work, that people might consider it to be punishment. And I think that we've been consistent, we've been open, we've been transparent, we've surveyed, we've communicated, and it's never been about discipline. It's always been about learning objectives and learning outcomes. It seems to me to be a good halfway point where we can say, if we were to institute these pouches, how much would it cost per room? What would it look like at the middle school class level? What would it look like at the high school level? What norms would we set? And I'd want to hear all of this by August, so that going into the school year, we were clear that we were making a good effort, a best foot forward effort, and clearly communicating with the students what our objectives were, and thinking creatively about the peer pressure or the whatever, the incentives and the disincentives to ensure those outcomes. And we could examine this again in another 6 months. There's nothing that says that we couldn't use school choice money to do the Yonder pouches in 6 months or a year. But once doing the Yonder pouches, that's several thousands of dollars of expenses that it's less easy to back out of and then try other things. I think that there's more, it's less in the spirit of prototyping our way to success here. So those are some of the thoughts, and I welcome comments from my colleagues on that.
May I just add some finances just to what you said, just because this also came up in some feedback. And April, it was 25 classrooms. Am I correct?
Yes.
Is it 25? Okay. So if you look, call it $30 for an unsecured pouch on the wall, you're looking at $750. If I type in safe, so it's locked, to Christine's point, something that locks so the teacher doesn't feel like nobody better open my room and make me responsible for something, that goes up to about $107.40. I'm just randomly picking objects off the internet, which then your cost would be about $2,685. Year one for Yonder assumed a cost of $25 per student plus a one-time $500 shipping fee. So that was $6,300. And in subsequent years, that price dropped to $1,350 per student. So it was almost in half, closer to $3,000. So your price points there, unsecured $750, locked just shy between $2,500 and $3,000, Yonder $6,300. I didn't mean to interrupt, but you had brought up some questions about finance.
Thank you for
There's
that.
two other financial points to consider. The Yonder pouches also include additional staffing, because we would have to have staffing on from 7 to 7:30 to have students come in. So there's staffing costs to that one. And for the locking pouches, if the primary concern is middle school and not high school, you might do a combination. You might not necessarily need all one or all another. So and there's not an additional staffing cost to that.
That's a substantial financial difference between all those different ranges, and I'm sure that's a cursory, search for alternatives. I bet an even, more substantive search might yield a few other options and give you what you're looking for. So yeah, I really feel as though we might want to try something that is helps us enforce our current policy. And Paul, you actually said it so well. That is, going to the Yonder pouch actually just takes us a whole nother level in terms of what our school committee policy would be, which is like no phones during the day at all, with the exception of those breaks. And I think that is, that is a whole nother consideration. So that's where I ended up on this. I did read through a lot of the parent feedback, and you're right, Paul, there was a lot of sentiment around that. And
again, we're only looking at 62 parents, and then only a certain percentage of those parents. So,
the data was pretty, clearly in favor of allowing their kids to have cell phones in the school, even if you looked at some people who, there were some proponents of like, yes, take it away, we'd love for them not to have it. And Annie, thank you for that breakdown. I went in and actually did even further analysis and took out those parents that didn't have kids in the middle school and high school yet, and also took out so only looking at middle school and high schoolers, and the data was definitely in support, or not in support of, policy that took it away for the entire day. So I don't know anything about the lockable pouch on the wall option. That's the kind of thing, Annie, that they would enter in a combination lock? Or
what I just looked up very quickly online was it looked like a cart that they could even see them. You slide your cell phone into a slot, and then it shuts, and there's a key, and the teacher would have the key. Again, that was a 30-second internet search, so I'm not really going to hang my hat on giving that multiple stars on Amazon.
So at the beginning of every class?
No, this is middle school. No, so this would be middle school at the beginning of the day.
Right. And then high school, beginning of every class. and the end of every class. They
I
have
would
to
imagine the
select.
students
What
would,
April said was that it could be two different solutions. The middle
Yeah,
school
but-
could have the
Yeah,
lockable
oh, no, I get
version and then the pouches for the high school students.
so the students, I would imagine, in high school, teachers would have the option of developing their own routines around this that worked with their classes. April can certainly speak to that, but I would imagine the students would, if there were numbered pouches that you had your number in this period, this is my number, I drop it in there. The student would be doing it rather than the teacher collecting it potentially, but April may have better ideas on how that might work.
Yeah, I would just say we came up with this sort of middle ground recently. So I haven't worked out all of the details quite in the same way, but as I said to Annie earlier, I'm not really concerned about figuring out the details. We figured out, the 5 million COVID schedules and made all of that work. So I'm not really worried. Like I do hear the concerns, and the concerns absolutely, Christine is right, that a teacher would have if I have to be in charge of this all day. So certainly those are all things I'd have to take into consideration. But if that's the way that the school committee goes, I think all of those things can be problem solved. So I'm not really concerned about the particulars. And certainly we'd have to go through all of those to kind of figure out how that's going to work and in what way, just like if we were looking at the yonder pouches.
And I would also add that we can also be very clear with students and with parents. Here's the policy. I mean, where I stand on this. Even if I personally impose it for myself, I'll be like, please don't text me during the day. I'm going to pretend like I have a pouch. That if we do something, we can tell families and students, you do have a choice. You don't need to bring a cell phone to school. So if you are concerned about losing it or how this will be implemented, your child can go to the office to make calls. We did say in terms of athletics or cancellations that we would create groups within School Brains for teams, which is even faster than a child now texting a parent, but rather the parent, just like a snow day or a late start, would get an immediate text. So there's many things we could do. And then a family and a student could decide, do I even want to risk taking my device to school, that it may, somebody could pick up the wrong device, but they have the choice. They don't, to Ethan's point, they don't need it. So they have a choice, and we can make it clear to people that, because I do think it's unfair to expect staff and teachers to somehow carry around this sense of, I'm now responsible for somebody else's property.
I should clarify the one time I would argue they need it, because I know that was Ethan's question. And to clarify what it says in the yonder policy, the one time we determined that they likely should have access is for students who leave campus. So for students who leave for an internship or work study or TA at the elementary school, of which we have several next year, those students can be juniors or seniors. And then the seniors also who have senior privileges would also have access. So we did decide, for safety purposes of leaving campus, that we thought that would be a time. And I guess we did not talk about this or think about this, but similarly, a field trip may or may not be a time where one would say that students need a cell phone as well.
Yeah, April, I should have brought that up earlier. We did discuss that, and also the idea that there could be circumstances that could lead to cell phones being utilized by the kids during the day. It wasn't like you put it in the yonder pouch and you never see it again, no matter what. There were certainly several cases. And I'll just add this. I think if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I had pouches on the wall. It was probably my first response. I'm still going to keep thinking about the teachers in this situation and the responsibilities that we're going to probably impose on them in these situations, and whether or not they need to be doing that. But the other part, that if we can find a way to limit the students' distractions during the day, then I'm all for it, because I think what we've recognized is that that's what a lot of the cell phones are, right? Even if it's a text from a parent or it's a text from a friend or whatever it may be, the distractions are what are impacting their learning and to some extent impacting the teaching that's happening. And I think we just need to be conscious of that.
The other thing that I've been reflecting about is our very conscious effort to attract school choice parents and students for open slots. Population is in decline. We really need to make sure that we're attracting students from other communities and having taking advantage of that opportunity to get school choice revenue and fill slots. And if I were a parent with a school choice kid, I think there's like communicating around sports, but then there's all kinds of other after school things, like I need to stay and talk with my teacher. I need to take that test, retake that test. I need to, there's our art group is meeting. It appears as though there's lots of unscheduled things that students have access to. And I would definitely want to make sure that my kid had the ability to communicate with me when I needed to go and pick them up. Because
each
it was on
classroom
me,
has a
there's no
phone.
busing for that situation.
Each classroom also has a phone, and teachers can allow the students to call their parent from the classroom. So it's not as if there's no other way to communicate. So there is a phone in each classroom.
And I'll just add, like, I know we've kind of forgot about this, but folks can still email. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it is like, I don't want to I agree with you, Humera. I absolutely agree that there can be times, but I don't want to pretend as if taking a phone away from a student completely cuts them off from the outside world. If everybody has a laptop, everybody has the ability to communicate. I know email isn't always the happiest way of communicating, but it is another way.
So if I might, I don't know that my stance has changed much since I first made my comment that we need to find a middle ground. And I definitely support and want to support the teachers. And I really like the idea of us trialing a middle ground out and reassessing it. If there's one thing that the school committee likes is surveys and feedback and reassessing how things are working. We're good at that, right? We like to talk about these and how they're working and how they're not working. I've been thinking this whole time since Paul talked at everybody's comments along the way. And the one thing that keeps sticking back is Paul's voice saying, we're not in 1970. We can't pretend that technology is not a part of children's lives now. And I'm not going to lie, if I'm at work, it's way easier for me to text my child or my husband or whatever real quick to communicate some type of information. And the phone in the classroom has a purpose. And I think it's a great use for emergency situations, but it can also, if you've got a daughter who just started getting their period and the mom's checking in, how are you doing? They should be allowed to do that at lunch in privacy. They shouldn't have to go to the office and be uncomfortable. If you've got a child who suffers from migraines, if you've got a child who woke up and just had a really bad day and the parent wanted to check in or say, hey, text me at lunch and just give me some feedback. Like, I don't feel that to be unreasonable. If it's not distracting a child's learning, if a child is not late for class because they've been on their phone in between classes, if they're still learning appropriately and gaining the knowledge that they need to learn, I think that we should appreciate the world that they're growing up in is just very different than the world that we're growing up in. And I feel as though we owe it to the teachers to find a solution to minimize distractions in class. And we also owe it to students to recognize that we grew up differently than they're growing up. And this is the way they are, and it's not going to change. Technology's going to prosper even more, and I think that a good starting point would be to sample out some middle ground. And like April said, who knows what it looks like? We really didn't look too much into it. Annie just gave us a few quick examples. Is there something better out there? Who knows? But now's the time to figure it out between now and the August meeting and solidify this before school starts. I agree it needs to be done before school starts. I just, and if it turns out that, this was the starting point, there's still too much distractibility, students are now super late for class, or hey, this is working really well. Do we need to invest in something more expensive? Or, hey, you know what? I don't really care that I don't have my phone on me and I don't really miss it that much. Let's do the pouch system. Who knows? That would be the point of looking at it in 6 months and say, what did we find out? Where do we stand? How much did it impact the parents and the students? We do that survey. How did it work? We do the survey with the teachers. How did it work? And come back at it and go from there. And again, reassessing that, reassuring that it's not punitive. This is not punitive, that the school system is just simply trying to aid students in their learning capabilities and help teachers decrease the amount of distractibility between students and their teaching. I just, I don't know that right now, the answer is take away all technology. I just don't know that that's the answer. And I just feel like since we haven't done it, I agree with Paul, it's extreme to go from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end without at least trying this middle ground and seeing if it's something we can make work.
The other thing I'd love to see is like come back in 2 quarters and see how the grades went up and how discipline changed, what kinds of infractions there were related to cell phones, if any. So revisiting our results in the December-January timeframe with a middle ground solution seems like a good approach.
Can I ask, I never even asked this, and I probably should have. What is the elementary school policy? We keep talking about the high school and the middle school, but I know there are kids that have them in the elementary school. What's their policy?
I believe Jen Dowd is a co-host. I'm also there she is.
Okay.
Hi, so our policy is currently that they, at the middle school level, the upper school level, so our 5th and 6th graders are able to have a device in their backpacks. And that's typically for kiddos that have something after school or they need transportation. They're not supposed to have it out at all, ever. And frankly, it's never been really an issue at Hadley Elementary School, which is nice. Maybe once or twice we have found out that kids have accessed their phones, but in my time being there. So it's not a rampant issue as it is at Hopkins, thankfully. Now, that's not to say that that may not change. Most of our issues that we do have with devices happen on the bus, unfortunately. Kids will take their devices out of their backpacks, and I have had some disciplinary issues with kiddos taking pictures and having their phones on the bus. So that is something to consider, when we're talking about devices at the elementary level, but for the most part, we don't have an issue.
I would make the assumption, though, that this would be across the board. I don't think it would sound fair to 7th and 8th graders to say, well, 5th and 6th graders can have their phones on them just because it hasn't been a problem. I would expect that the rules would be the same at the elementary school as they are at the high school. So if only 5th and 6th graders are allowed to have it right now, Jen, then I would expect that it would be treated the same way that 7th and 8th graders are treated, just from my perspective.
Right. And when I say that they're allowed to have them, we just really haven't enforced it. And so I am curious to see what the decision will be going forward, because I would like to align what's happening at Hopkins with the middle school students that we have in 5th and 6th grade. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here as a parent too, because I'm curious as to what the decision will be. And I see pros and cons for each as a parent, but as an administrator, I would, those 1 or 2 times where pictures have been taken of students on the bus using cell phone, it gets uncomfortable, and students, especially at the younger level, younger ages, I'm starting to have those conversations more and more about what social media, what the implications of images of students on social media can do, and how it follows you. And so we're starting to have those conversations younger and younger. We're not seeing that, I just want to put that out there, that it's not all roses all the time at an elementary level, we're starting to have those conversations, and we'll continue to do so. But whatever is decided, I just want everyone to know that I would work in conjunction with, Ms. Camuso, Principal Camuso, Dr. McKenzie, to make sure that our protocols and our procedures are in alignment. So what makes sense? Because I wouldn't want a 5th grade student to tell a 7th and 8th grade student that they get to have their phones, and that just seems unfair.
Thank you, Jen.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see if we can summarize. What I'm hearing is a support for a middle ground solution, that we might ask the team to find a lockable pouch situation for the middle school, that we would love to have our procedures and norms outlined in August, that any policies that would need adjusting, we would revisit during the month of August through policy subcommittee and then the full subcommittee, and that we would want to analyze results from data related to discipline and academic outcomes after 2 quarters, and survey. You're right, Tara, just frequent sort of rechecking in with the students, the educators, and the parents as to how that was going, and have an honest conversation again about whether we needed to go another click to a Yonder pouch. That's still potentially on the table if we wanted to go in that direction, or modify our approach in any way. Is there anything that I missed in that capture of that?
Thank you, everybody. This is helpful for us.
Thank you, Annie and April, for assessing and caring and helping us deeply think about this. Okay, great. We are going to move to the next item on the agenda, and that is the athletic move-up policy. And namely, we're going to have a discussion and first reading of a policy. But Annie, I have a question for you. There are multiple policies here, recommended revisions. So is it really discussion and first reading, or?
Well, it is to a certain extent, and this is unusual, and this is why. So I'll turn it over to the policy subcommittee to talk about what they heard, the existing policy, what they heard at the meeting on the 18th, and based on what they've heard, and we didn't hear anything differently this evening in public comment, what their suggestions are. Now, I do understand this doesn't feel like a typical first reading where everything is neat and tidy and you say, oh, that looks good, and then it comes back August 22nd and you approve it. There'll be more of a discussion. You folks may give some input to their suggested revisions. Policy subcommittee can meet between now and August 22nd. You'll get a pretty finalized policy then on August 22nd. That would then be the second reading and vote, because we do need a policy in place before school starts. August 22nd is your next meeting. August 22nd is when soccer starts. So we're not going to wait till September. But now I would turn it over, or through the chair, to the policy subcommittee. But that's why it looks differently. The individuals, and in this case, I would just say Ethan and Chris can talk about their thoughts on revisions. I think they're looking also for feedback from the entire committee. We don't need to, Ms. Jennings isn't with us at this point, so that's there for people to look at, but we don't need to go through it. I'll really just leave it to Chris and Ethan to talk about their suggestions and perhaps hear from their colleagues on the school committee. And then the 22nd, we would vote to approve whatever policy is presented.
Great. Ethan.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot of public comment for this one, a lot of public comment in support of kind of revisiting this policy and making some changes to it. I thought Mr. Sudnick did a great job of kind of explaining kind of how we got here as well, and the reason behind why, you know, we should probably be revisiting this policy. I think the reality is kind of, and you can look at the revisions, is that I don't know, and I don't know when that document was put into place, but given the declining numbers in athletics or overall enrollment in Hadley, we don't have as many middle school teams, and so we were focused in on just one sport in terms of why this policy matters. And I do think, and Christine, you can follow up, I do think that it's time to make a change on this policy, just given kind of where we are as a school community.
Christine, do you want to add to that?
There we go. Sorry about that. Didn't get that. Well, part of it was not just the policy, but on the form itself, it was a matter of just clarifying, taking off the word 8th grade and making it for middle school. So that one is not as, there aren't many comprehensive changes except for a couple of things. The other is to, you know, think about what are policies that we're going to put into place, and then what are the operational policies that will be included in the athletic handbook, and making sure that those all align, because right now they don't. And that, I think that's what caused some of the questions, was the, you know, the alignment. So, and I've offered to work with Amy Jennings and do whatever I can to help her, you know, to go over that. And I know she's being thrown into the deep end of the pool. So.
Great.
Is it okay if I add one more thing to this? I know I said that something is coming up, was at the policy subcommittee.
Yes.
So just so the public can understand, the policy as it's currently written does make references to ensuring adequate playing time. So some assurances of playing time, that you wouldn't do any sort of move up if it might disturb that or disrupt that. It also talks about only considering that essentially move up is the exception, not the rule, and it's done. You have to take into consideration what the impact would be on participation, maybe from high school students. You have to take into consideration, is it really necessary based on being able to field a team, which speaks to numbers. And I would say what we heard loudly and clearly from the people who attended policy subcommittee was that they did not feel that it was right to deprive a middle school athlete, student athlete, who demonstrates the skill, the ability, and the willingness to do the work, to prohibit them from participating at a high school level. If the coach thought they were ready and went through the procedures, the people who spoke essentially said that just doesn't seem right, and we don't do it anywhere else in the district. So this policy is an anomaly. So a change would be saying this move up, just like everything else we do, we take into consideration the student's skill, the student's ability, the student's developmental level, and we try to match their experience. In this case, it's extracurricular and not academic. We're trying to match their experience with what it appears that they need in order to be successful and to be adequately challenged, so that it wouldn't be just a case of an institutional need is the only time that we would consider a move up, but we take into consideration the student athlete who's exhibiting the skill to do that. Just wanted to make that clear for the public.
And I'll add, because Annie brought up a good point, that we talked a lot about how students who want to take honors classes it's not based on their age. If they're really good in the band, it's not based on their age. They can kind of play up and play in the band. So that's something that we talked about. And the other part, and I'll add this now, and I think it's definitely worth the conversation, is, you know, given our success with school choice, given our success in athletics, the idea of kind of potentially holding kids back who are good enough to play on the varsity level could have them seeking to go elsewhere, could have them looking at other schools, and you know, given, you know, how well we've done athletically recently, and I guess, you know, all the time, that's something that I think we should at least consider when thinking about this policy.
And I thought of this actually after the meeting, and I probably should have said it then, but I hadn't thought about it. We talked about band, but when it comes to, say, like theater, you have to try out for a play. You're given a role based on your talent. And we accept that when it comes to theater, but not to accept it when it comes to sports, I don't think is, I just don't, I think we're saying that just because kids want more, that should, that should be paramount to what is actually right in terms of what the students need.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of comments that I have, and I know these are not the final versions, but it also sounds like what we see and approve will happen really fast. So I thought I'd share it now. I definitely agree that we should give every athlete the opportunity to play to their skill level. And if that means moving up, that means moving up. And my own firstborn was moved up as an 8th grader to a starter on the baseball team, and experienced a lot of success from playing at that higher level. He could keep up and he was able to contribute effectively. There are some things, though, I really want to make sure that we keep, and I know this is evolving, but I agree that there should be no cuts at the high school level for a high schooler who can play for either high school or varsity or junior varsity teams. I think that's really, really important. I think it's really important that parents sign off on this. I remember when I was first approached, it did cross my mind to say no because I wasn't sure that an 8th grader would be able to effectively compete, with or not get hurt with seniors. So it was something that I needed to talk myself through, and I think that approval and parental permission should be required.
Oh yeah, so, I mean that's all still in there. It's just spelled out more clearly.
One of the versions was asserting that it would be deleted. That's why I'm talking about it, Christine. And then the third thing was input from a guidance department. And I really do think that that's an important, right? We're student athletes, not athlete students. And as one of our parents in the community has said, reminded us, so not talking to the guidance department to find out what the students' academic experiences are at Hopkins would, I think, be a problem because of that higher level of practice and play, later game schedules. It could further have them be in the hole if they're at risk of anything. So I think we really ought to make sure that academically they're on solid ground and have that.
Humaira, can I jump in on that, just because that was one of the things that I crossed out, and I'm not married to that idea, but if everybody else has said yes and the guidance counselor says no, are we under is there an understanding that we would say, well, then we can't do this? If a parent says yes, a principal says yes, like that was just the only one that made me pause as to everyone else kind of makes sense, but that one, I mean, I can see where it would make sense. It felt like if that person said no and everyone else said yes, where would we land? And I know that's just one example, but
I just think it's really important that they're part of the conversation. And so for that reason, I don't think it's everybody has to vote yes in order for it to go through. I think it's the conversation that has to be had, and we should make sure that they're included.
Great.
And how much would they differ too, right? So if you've got a principal signing off on it and the guidance counselor's weighing in, they're looking at a child's well-being, their academics. I don't know how much a principal and a guidance counselor would disagree on that at that point. And I think that I agree with you, Humaira, on the guidance counselor. And in general, I agree on the principal, but both of you are advocating that a 7th or 8th grader can move up to JV or varsity pending their skill. And I think Ethan, you put it in there that there should be some like evaluation by, I think, the athletic director or something to ensure it's appropriate, right?
So there was just Eric had talked a little bit about in the past, if I believe, and Annie, Christine, if I'm wrong on this, I think he had talked about the fact that in the past, if a varsity coach or maybe even a JV coach wanted to bring up a 7th or 8th grade, they had to kind of observe them for a couple of days. Again, in the world that's evolving right now, the idea that this is kind of back when there was a middle school team for probably a lot of sports and a lot more players, and it was maybe harder to evaluate 30 kids instead of 20 kids. And now if you only have, you just, I don't know if that's necessary because those kids might be trying out with JV and varsity, so it might not be necessary.
So do we have a middle, just, I don't play sports. Do we have a middle school team?
We've,
It
For
depends.
basketball,
it depends. And
as of now.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say COVID really put a dent in that, and our population numbers have been on the decline. So both of those factors have led to a drop in the numbers at the middle school level. And we've had them in the past, and we could potentially have it again if that changes. But, you know, as it stands right now, there's only one sport that has a middle school team, and that's
Okay.
basketball.
Okay, and so then I guess I'm looking at this just to play a little bit of devil's advocate because I get it, and I listened in on the policy meeting that you guys had just to hear, and I heard Eric's comments, and I agree. High school is high school sports are a competitive sport, and I get the difference between high school and elementary. Elementary should absolutely not be competitive. You should not be trying out to be able to make a team in elementary school. It should be everybody participates, and the philosophies behind elementary are different than the philosophies behind high school, right? Like I get that difference. But to play devil's advocate, how many kids do we have that are deciding to move up for 7th or 8th grade when you've got almost a full team to the middle school, but then these kids are like, I want to play on varsity. So now you've got, again, this is my inadequacies with sports. So if you need 5 people on a court for basketball, right? And you've got 8 people that are in the middle school. So you're like, yay, we have a team, right? Like, tell me if I'm wrong with my numbers. But then, of those 8 people, 4 of them, qualify to move up to JV or varsity. So now we're saying that those other 4 just, they don't get to play, right? So now in something that's competitive at the high school level, you've got kids that are in middle school still trying to maybe decide whether or not it's for them, but now they're not given the opportunity to do it because you've got X number of kids moving up. So I guess that's kind of the thought that I had. And I guess it would really depend on how much is this really going to be of prevalence, right?
It's every year and every sport is a bit different. So the policy for basketball, it's always an issue because we've had times, and we've had 20 kids on the middle school team. And so I think that part of this question is, and part of what raised this issue was, do we keep a kid down just because of numbers? Because we do have a full JV bench. Do we keep a kid for baseball? We had there was an 8th grader who pitched 92 miles an hour. That's, that could hurt someone at a middle school level. My son was 6'4" and 250 pounds. He could definitely crush a couple of middle schoolers if he fell on them, kind of thing. So there's always this sort of year to year situation where we can't, make a policy that is so narrow that, that there's no wiggle room to promote kids who really deserve it. And really, it's not that it's going to happen all the time. And again, just because they want to move up doesn't mean they can't. The coaches have to go through a lot to get them there. We're just saying that if a student has that athletic ability, that they should be allowed with, if everybody, agrees with that they should be allowed to play at an upper level, because it doesn't make sense to keep them in the middle school if their ability is so much higher.
I hear you. And I'm not again, like an eighth grader that like people are looking at this child and they're like, oh my God, this kid's going to be a pro baseball player. I would hate to have it be that our school policy held them back from higher achievement.
And seventh graders.
That's not sure. Whatever,
Right.
Seventh, eighth grade, whatever. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just, I guess if this were to go into place, and I understand the need for a little bit more broader policy, but I guess my hesitation would be about any type of ambiguity, right? So if you've got a child in eighth grade, and again, this is something that I'm probably speaking and Annie can correct me on, right? Or a younger child that qualifies for an AP class, you have got like very complicit data to show that this student has met criteria and is appropriate, right? You can back up that data by this, and this to say, yeah, this student needs to go up. Like it's very
You can do that
clear,
athletically.
right?
The coaches have that data. They have stats.
So very, very, very clear stats. Like it has to be data, right? It can't just be, well, this kid's really good and I've watched them play. Like it has to be really objective, in my opinion, really objective, because Hadley's a small town. I think it needs to just be really objective criteria in order for a child to move up, so that there's no ambiguity as to why a student was moved up.
My only concern with that is the social emotional factors that, you as a child can be acing everything, but not necessarily be able to handle the pressure of an AP course. And that's the determination of the teacher, the principal, the guidance counselor. So I think that by, it has to come with the recommendation of the coaches, and we have to give them, we hire them and we trust them to make those determinations based on their recommendation.
But it can't
Just
be
as
well,
and I would add, just as we would the band director or the theater director or the whatever activity. I think when a theater director is making the decision on who's going to be leading the play, I don't know that they're getting deep into the data. I think they're looking at the student, how they perform, how they're able to navigate the role and handle it with everything else they're doing throughout the day as a student. But if they're good enough to do that, they're going to be asked to be in the play. And I think that's the approach that we should, in my opinion, take with this. And as you can see in my example, like I cut out a ton of things because like, I don't think this needs to be that deep. I think we need to be able to say, a varsity coach has been brought in to field a team and be competitive. And if one of the players that's going to allow them to be competitive is a 7th or 8th grader, I think they should have the opportunity to come to the school and say, I want this kid on the team. They're good enough to play on the team. And as long as everybody else is on board with that, I think we just have to say, like, this is for the best interest of the student, of the team, of the community. And yes, there may be a middle school team that falls short of a couple of players, but I'm also pretty sure that there may be still park and rec leagues that those kids can play in and opportunities for them to play if there wasn't a middle school team.
And I hear you. And again, I'm not against a student moving up based on their ability, but again, that devil's advocate in drama club. So for instance, I did drama club in high school, that I can speak to. And nobody was excluded. It didn't matter if you were the lead, you could be a side, you could be doing set design, you could be doing lighting. So everybody was able to be a part of it, even if it wasn't exactly what you were looking for. So again, my biggest concern is if somebody wants to play in the middle school, but they can't because we've moved up 4 kids to the high school, what do we do then?
That's not typical though for us to move up that many kids. It's not usually to where we can't field another team because of it. The only time that would happen is then you would move all the kids up. That would be more like for soccer and baseball, because of you can have so many kids on the field so you can have a larger amount of kids on the bench. So if that were the case, then we would just have a JV and a high school.
Okay, so I guess
does that make sense?
Yeah, and that addresses my point is that, again, my concern is not necessarily the student who's moving up because they're good. It's the student who now is not able to play the sport because students are moved up, right? I don't want to see a missed opportunity for a student because other students advance, just because I'm not going to be a pro baseball player and I enjoy sports and want to do sports and I'm not half bad, right? Maybe I'm mediocre, but I really enjoy it, but now I'm not allowed to do it because so-and-so moved up.
But
So
then
it's
that-
less about the person moving up. It's more about the kids who are left behind, just ensuring that we're not just excluding people.
I mean, first of all, this does fall within MIAA regulations that we're allowed to do. We're allowed to have middle schools on our varsities. So at least, we do have that behind us. And the fact that, again, I guess I'm also looking at it from the other side where, so my kid who, plays basketball 24/7, 365, is looking for a college scholarship, wants to continue. He doesn't get to, move up because somebody else's feelings are going to get hurt. So
No, it's not
my
about
kid,
the
and which
feelings,
means
that's what I'm
I
saying.
now take my kid and I go to Northampton, or I go to Deerfield, or I go somewhere else. And that has been the situation where we lose students because they are going to go somewhere else where they can play or where their talent is appreciated.
That's
And their
true, the
talent is
opposite
honed.
too, though, right? So I'm not excluding your student. I'm including your student. I say they should have that ability to move up, but now we don't have a team, and now we lose students who aren't able to play on a team because they're excluded and
But
don't have a team.
that typically never happens where we don't have enough. Like, all of those students would have moved up to JV. If it becomes an issue with numbers,
Annie, is there a
that's not the norm.
situation, can you speak to that specific situation of a middle school team being dismantled because some key players were moved up?
And I do think it's to the point that Chris was making, that typically in sports where you can have more children on the field, so let's take soccer and baseball, historically, recently, in our recent history, most sports, frequently, we just have a JV and a varsity, in which case then essentially all your middle school players just became JV players. In sport, just like Chris had said, in basketball, where you have very few people on the court at one time and you're indoors, you don't have a crowded bench. Again, it would be unusual, and that probably does sound like an unsatisfactory response in some ways, Tara, because I appreciate what you're looking for, of like, let's make sure that there's no room for people wondering, is this an arbitrary decision? I think the biggest shift in policy is that now you can be considered for a move up if all these other institutional conditions are met, despite how prepared you are, ready you are, despite your needs in terms of your athletic developmental profile. We can't consider it until these institutional conditions are met. Certain numbers, we didn't do this. The shift would be to say, no, we start with what is your individual need? Now, what we're giving as examples of middle schoolers who, even though in our school committee, we do have representation of folks whose kids have been moved up, there were still many students who didn't. I mean, that's still really, I'm going to say, the exception, not the rule. That's still the exception, not the rule. That a kid, it's just like the students for whom we've had to redo schedules because they're in advanced math classes in middle school and needing high school math. They are the exception, not the rule. And so
Annie,
for the most part, yeah.
Can we ask for a commitment to keep a middle school team active and thriving despite students moving up. We want students
So-
to move up. We want
So-
them-
so can I-
The problem would be, of course, that if you don't have enough, in which case you're just all your middle school players. I think what you're trying to say is,
Yes.
can we have a commitment that if a student wants to play, there'll be an opportunity to play?
That's what I.
And that may
Yes.
mean that all the middle school kids ended up as JV. It
Right.
could be that, because we didn't have enough kids for 3 teams.
Right.
Right.
So
And
you-
that's what's happening. That's
Yeah, that's
other
right.
than basketball, every other sport is experiencing that, where they have enough numbers for 2 teams, not 3.
True.
And so if that middle schooler, that 7th grader comes out for the baseball team and they're not good enough to be on varsity, I believe that they're probably ending up on JV. And so Tara, I hear what you're saying. Like I think in a world before where there was a lot of middle school teams, maybe this could have potentially happened, but like, I just don't believe that the numbers are big enough that we're going to see a middle school team go from 8 to 4 and now they can't field a team. I think one, that doesn't happen, and 2, if it felt like that was going to happen, those 4 might be able to slide on a JV and at least be part of a team.
Right.
Great.
And
And
I
so
will-
is there a way to make that policy, Annie, that the school committee sentiment that any kid who wants to play will be on a team's, one of the teams?
Oh, then that also means you could have as many as 20 people on a basketball team, and that is not attainable. That it's just not manageable.
So what I'm hearing is that that is not possible, that there are
Well-
some kids that will be told, no, you cannot play.
No. That's not the same as telling them that. So I think each sport is a bit different in terms of the numbers for teams. We could very well have, and we did at one time, have 20 kids on the middle school team for basketball. Then we created 2 squads, the gold and the blue. And then they would alternate games, because this way it was 10 and 10 and everybody could have playing time. You put 20 kids on a team, on a basketball team, it's going to be nearly impossible to make sure everybody plays, because there's only so much time. What I'm saying is that if we make that kind of commitment, we may end up in some ways actually, it just seems like that would be,
Christine, if a kid wants to play at Hopkins, can they play?
well, current,
I believe as of now, yes, they
Yes.
can. But I think that I don't think that it's necessary for us to write that into policy.
Okay.
Right. we
again,
do
my
everything, yeah.
again, my sentiment is not that there is a middle school team. It's that if they have enough for a middle school team, and I think, Annie, you have already answered the question for me, I believe. And as long as this policy isn't restrictive enough that it now changes how this goes. If students are moved up from 7th and 8th grade, whatever grade, to a JV or varsity because they qualify based on their skill level, there is still going to be an opportunity, if there are students interested in the middle school, to play without exclusions on at least the JV team. So I guess that's, again, my concern, because Christine, you're talking about size and this and that. And again, if we're moving students up because of their skill, you're going to have parents saying, well, that's not fair because now my kid can't play just because that kid is, it's just, you've got somebody who's excelling and somebody who's mediocre. So as long as every student has an opportunity to be on a team, that's all I care.
Okay, that's not, but that's still not the same as play, like that has a completely different, so now you're going into like the concept of playtime.
No,
That's
we didn't talk
different.
about
No, not
playtime.
play.
No, we're not talking about playtime.
Just
We're not talking about
participation.
playtime. We're talking about
Yeah,
opportunity to
just
play.
opportunity.
And-
Right.
To be on a team.
I think
Opportunity to be on
that
a
for the
team.
policy subcommittee, I think what I hear folks saying loudly and clearly to see in the next iteration is that we want to make sure that our policies allow students to have experiences that are well matched with their ability, that those abilities are evaluated in transparent ways that are clearly and explicitly communicated to student athletes, and that we evaluate policy to ensure that we don't design something that unintentionally limits opportunities for those students who may not be as skilled. And that what you're saying is you'd like the policy subcommittee to make sure those three things are at the forefront as they look at their revisions and bring back something on the 22nd.
Precisely.
Does that capture it? Okay.
Does. Thank you.
So should we have another meeting before this, before the next meeting?
Yes, and I will schedule that. I put it in my to-do notes for tomorrow. So I'll reach out to both of you to do that
Thank you.
before the 22nd. Sure.
Thank you, Policy Committee, for wrestling with this. And
Paul, do you have any thoughts? I feel like we've just completely consumed the conversation.
No, I think they should be allowed to move up. I have a lot of faith in the athletic director, the principal. I hear your concern, Tara. I just don't think it's going to be a problem because I don't think people are going to intentionally limit all those people who want to play. That's just not how sports work in Hadley. So, yeah. But I think you captured it well, Annie.
great, thank you. All right, everyone, thanks for weighing in. Look forward to seeing the next edition of this policy. Moving on to, oh gosh, now I have to find the policy. I think we're on to the fields project. And so, Annie, do you want to start that off? Or
I can be quick on my thoughts and then Paul can jump right in. He's probably way more well-versed in this and even understanding the site plan and where we should go from here. So thank you, Paul, for having taken the lead on this since phase one. My suggestion at this point, given that the cost estimate for phase two came in at, if you round it, about 1.5 million. I think both Paul and I were, that was a surprising figure. We weren't expecting 1.5 million for phase two. My thoughts are, and I should say this, I had said that I would bring to you a CPA proposal for you to review. You can see linked into the agenda where I started one. My concern is that if we bring a $1.5 million ask to the CPA without having a way to clearly communicate to the CPA, Hadley taxpayers who will go to special town meeting and again, annual town meeting, if we don't clearly lay out, here are all the capital investments we need to make over the next 10 years. Here are the sources of funding that we may be able to use for each one of these. Here's how much school choice revenues we're anticipating applying to each one of these things. In the absence of that information, it's understandable that CPA and or taxpayers might hear, wait a minute, why does the school need $1.5 million for phase two? And they have a significant amount of money in school choice. My recommendation, it does mean, and then I definitely want Paul to weigh in on whether this really even makes sense from a timing perspective, but my recommendation would be, we've asked Colliers, who did the facilities audit, to translate that into a 10-year capital plan and to order those priorities in the way that they think makes the most sense, to identify those that would be eligible for MSBA funding. We also add the fields to that list. For each project, we identify, is it CPA eligible, yes or no? Is it MSBA eligible, yes or no? The estimated amount of town funding we would be requesting for each project, the estimated amount of school choice funding we would recommend applying to that project. We have that all in one place. That allows the taxpayer to see that of the $10 million in building costs and 1.5, which again is a cost estimate right now, it's not an actual bid, and the 1.5 million in fields, that only one of those things is eligible for CPA funding, which is why we would be asking for CPA support for it. But it also allows people to see explicitly where the school committee and how the school committee is earmarking school choice. So that's my recommendation at this point, which would mean that we may or may not, we may have that already on August 22nd, and the deadline for the CPA proposal is not until September 1st. So that's not, doesn't mean we're not going to try it all, but that's my recommendation in terms of a clear communication strategy that can be in a document that the public could access, that we could speak to at a town meeting, that would be easy for people to understand. That's my only recommendation, and Paul certainly knows the fields better than I.
Paul.
I think that's a smart strategy. The question I had was one of timing, right? If the next town meeting is September, right, be later in September. So if CPA, and CPA hasn't met in a long time. So just to be clear, Annie's been doing a good job keeping them engaged, but they're only meeting a couple times a year now. And the next one I think is September. So if we give them, they need to prepare what they're going to recommend for town meeting, right, in late September. So they need our application by September 1st. Is that right,
Correct.
Annie?
The deadline is September 1st, correct.
And the question is, you're not sure whether we'll have the information from Colliers by then?
I'd like to think that we would. And the school committee could then decide on August 22nd if this is based on that full picture. Are we recommending that we ask CPA for the entire amount, for a portion of that? But yes, so I can't guarantee that Colliers will give it to us, but I'm hopeful. We asked for it since our last meeting. I think folks are just pretty busy.
Yeah, okay. And I think that gives us some time too to assess what other demands there might be of CPA across the town, and then also what their current account is. Generally that they're carrying an account from 2 to 3 million in the past. I don't know what their obligations are now. So it'd be good for us to have that sense. If we're asking for 100% of what they have available or 50%, I think that would make a difference as well. And then we do not, as a school, have any other requests for CPA, right? This would be our sole request.
That's correct, because of the limitations on CPA. So this is eligible because it falls under recreation space.
Right.
Yeah, the other things we need to do in the building would not be eligible for CPA funding.
Yeah, okay. I think it's a smart strategy.
One thing to consider is, I read that in the Wall Street Journal, price of lumber came down. And, while there's that doesn't really pertain to our project, inflation has really driven up cost of gasoline has also driven up costs. There'll be fuel used in the making of moving earth. I wonder whether some degree of time and allowing inflationary pressures to ease a little bit might bring the bid down. It means that we have to ask Berkshire, the folks at Berkshire, to give us another estimate later on down the line, but another 6 months to a year. I mean, I wonder whether some time might help us get to a number that feels a little bit more palatable and a little bit more reasonable from development perspective. The other thing, Annie, you mentioned when we spoke last about this level of investment not yielding like an additional sport, like a track or something like that. It does feel like a substantial investment for the same number of sports. That doesn't.
Which is what it always was. So there's no surprise there. But I did in fact tell you individually in a conversation that we had that I had heard from a resident and taxpayer at the kind of this interpretation of, gosh, are we expanding programming for this level of investment? Again, nothing has changed from the initial master plan. It was just a question. I think when people see cost estimates that are that high, it's understandable that folks then say, well, help me understand this a bit more. So it was a question that I shared with you.
And I do have the question of like, well, can we do both? Wait for inflationary pressures to come down and also just ask ourselves the question, is there a way to look at the plan in a way that gives us an additional sport, like a track? We do have a.
So there's definitely, I mean, it's a multi-use field, right? So we'll be improving a softball field for girls. We'll be improving a baseball field for boys, and we'll be improving utility fields for co-ed. So by all means, if there's a desire for ultimate frisbee or lacrosse, you could, I mean, we have those sports, and at least that you can do through co-ops with other schools. So this doesn't preclude or necessarily encourage that. It just makes our fields nicer. It's the completion of the track as well around. So if you are from a running perspective, it does augment that. We will now have a full loop, and I've yet to know exactly how far it is, but I know that the walking path as it is now gets a lot of use, and this I think will just increase that. make it look a lot nicer, to be honest. As you know, Humira, our boys varsity field is not it's not the best, right? There's some elevation issues that are challenging and potentially harmful. I mean, I think it's expensive and costs are up. Some things he said fixed price are 20-30% higher, some 50%. Wage, the required wages have gone up from 35 to 40, from 45 to 45 to 60. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily wait and to see. I think, and right now what we're asking for is the maximum amount of money to be allocated. That's not to say we're going to be required to spend it all.
Great. And also just for the viewing public, CPA money is taxpayer money that's required by law to be set aside for projects dedicated to preserve the community. There are stipulations about the kinds of things that it can cover, but it is money that is in a savings bank, if you will, that just needs to be allocated by application to the CPA. So it's not new tax dollars. No one's tax rates go up as a result of applying for CPA money. It just means that the money that's been sitting there, that's already sitting there by law, is something that could be put to use for a plan that we've been talking about for years.
Exactly, right. The Community Preservation Act is a Massachusetts act. Hadley, at some point in the past, voted and voluntarily chose to affix a tax on ourselves, a property tax, a portion of which goes into that Community Preservation Act. There's elected officials that then they decide how to spend it, and there's certain state rules by which they can determine. So yes, our first phase, that $700,000-800,000, there was about a little bit more than half of that came from CPA. So now we'd always gone to them saying, hey, we'll do phase 1 this way. Now we want to do phase 2, and going through and asking them, hey, and this is where Annie's saying, let's take a look from a school's perspective. Here are all the things that we need to do to fix our facilities, including the fields. And there's different pots of money that we can access: school choice, CPA, or some other, capital, to the capital funds from the town overall. So let's assess those all and get that full picture before we just go to CPA and ask about the fields.
Great, thank you. Okay, Annie, we will wait for your next report in August. Hopefully the Collier report will come in and we can look at it more comprehensively, and it gives us enough time to turn around a CPA application should we want to move forward with that in September. Terrific.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul. All right. Disposition of Pearson 2011 My World Geography textbook.
Yes, as usual, we will recycle what we can. These are no longer used. There isn't a replacement for it. Geography is not a separate course, and geography is taught as part of middle school history courses embedded into that. So we're not using these textbooks, and we just need a school committee vote to dispose of them.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Business manager reports will be presented in August. Moving to school committee reports and discussion. Finance, I do not have anything to present, and the tri-board has not met yet, or I've not been notified. Annie, have you heard anything from the tri-board and the finance?
I have not.
Okay.
I have not.
All right, so we're on hold on there. Policy, we just talked about a whole number of them. Ethan and Christine, is there anything else from the policy committee?
Nothing I can think of.
Okay, terrific, thank you. CES, Tara?
No updates. I'll report back in September when meetings start again.
Okay, terrific. And we heard about fields. Are there any other capital items, Paul? No. Okay, terrific. We have select board member Joyce Chunglo here, and let's see if she has any announcements. I think I want to need to make sure she's able to unmute. Hi, Joyce, are you there?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
Lauren
good
Smith.
evening, everybody. Glad to see you all. And you've had a long meeting tonight. I have been here from the beginning. Certainly many thoughts on many things. And having been on school committee for 15 years before, I don't envy your decisions you're having to make right now on several different issues. But as of October, we will have a town meeting in October 27th. I do suggest that you do a placeholder, even if you don't have all of your numbers right now for September 1st, to at least put in something if you need to have anything done either with the CPA funds or any other issues that might be coming along for funding. Also checking in with the capital committee to make sure that we're all on board with what we have. You can also access our finance people at Town Hall if you need any of their access to help you with any of your financing also. So we're more than happy to help you in those areas too.
Great, thank you, Joyce. Appreciate you
Thank
being
you.
here. And it's usually not this long a meeting, so thank you. for
That's
hanging in
okay.
there.
I don't mind. I'm used to long meetings. 36
All right.
years, we're okay. We're good.
Terrific, thank you. Okay,
You're
we're
welcome.
down to the wire and we're approving some minutes from June 24th, 2022. Do I hear a motion?
So
So
moved.
Moved.
And a
Seconded.
second? Terrific. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And I'm sorry, on policy subcommittee, I just clarified with the attorney, this does need to be a vote of Ethan and Chris only, the policy subcommittee only.
Okay, so do I hear a policy subcommittee vote for the subcommittee minutes from July 18?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
And both in favor?
Yes. Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you, Annie, for that. Approval of the AP warrants of June 2022. And this is one that Paul can vote on, I believe.
Correct.
Terrific. So do I hear a motion to approve the AP warrants from June 2022?
So moved.
Seconded.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. And approving the payroll warrants for June 2022. This is one where Paul abstains. Do I hear a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved. Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Terrific. We already voted on the pre-K handbook as well as the disposition of textbooks. Let's talk about August meeting dates.
8/22. Sorry, it's 8/22. I should have that in there. I'm putting that in there for you
All right.
right now.
So actually, I was thinking it was the Monday afterwards, which is H29. Is there any reason
Yeah,
why?
so
we're not
the-
meeting?
Isn't the 22nd to 4th? Aren't there 5 Mondays? Did I do this wrong?
Um,
I might have done it wrong.
check.
That is the fourth Monday. And I assume we want to get the athletic policy squared away before sports.
Oh,
Yeah.
and the student handbook before the kids come back regarding cell phones. But I picked it because it was the 4th Monday and school committee meets on the 4th Monday. It also is a good thing that it's before school starts and you'll be looking at handbook language for cell phone and the sports policy.
Okay, terrific. So August 22nd it is, and you won't have a policy meeting in advance of that. You'll have that at a whole nother time.
Correct.
So we'll be meeting at 5:30 p.m. on August 22nd.
Correct.
All right, great. And we will not be meeting in executive session.
Correct.
So if I can have a to disband.
Motion to
Permanently.
adjourn. So final.
In a second.
How about we
It does
just
feel
adjourn
final,
tonight?
right? I mean, come on, we're like pushing 8 o'clock here.
That's it.
Yeah, you'd think it was COVID.
Exactly. I heard a motion and a second, so all in favor.
Aye.
Aye. Terrific.
good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.